Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Upskill with Read Tech. Your presenters for today's webinar will be Read Tech subject matter experts, Gary Sainer, Senior Manager of Information Solutions, Wendy Scott, Head of Professional Services, and Adrian Alderfer, Associate Director of Regulatory Operations.
Thank you very much, Aaron, for that introduction. Today is continuing the series of Upskill for the pharmaceutical area, and we have a couple in the past, but this time we swing around and pick up the topic of eCTD. So those that have been working with eCTD, this might simply be a recap for you. Those that are relatively new, it'll be a good introduction as to the background of eCTD and a lot of good information that Wendy and Adrian and I have put together to pass your way. So there's a couple topics that we'll talk about. First of all, the drug development process. What is that full life cycle that occurs. And then focusing in on the eCTD, we'll look at the definition, some history, the background, how it came about, and look at some of the processes and benefits. And then there's some activity. So this is a dynamic document specification that has changes over the course of time, and there's a significant improvement coming on. We'll talk about that and pick up some Read Tech services near the end of the webinar and have some question and answer time at the end. In this section, we want to highlight some of the activities that are surrounding the drug development process. We very commonly get a question around the timing, and many companies are a little bit naive in thinking, at least I was hearing the timeline and the amount of effort that takes to bring a drug to market is a lot of effort, a lot of time. And when you go from discovery through to development to final approval and then eventually to delivery, and then it really doesn't end. So I'm going to ask Wendy to start this conversation to give us some information, maybe some metrics, put some numbers around this activity. Wendy, can you start us off with talking about this drug development information?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Yeah, for drug development life cycle time, a lot of the clients that we work with who have a promising molecule that might be a really strong, promising therapy for an unmet, disease, for example, the first question that they ask is, how do we go ahead and go through the regulatory life cycle of getting our drug approved? And that typically happens from 12 to 15 years. And that all starts from the discovery of the molecule all the way through, phase 3 studies. And that whole process, you could see here in this chart, which I find it very helpful. You could see the durations of time of each of those phases. One of the things that really people find it surprising, especially if they're not from, the regulatory space or in the clinical trial space, is that there could be an upwards of 5,000 molecules or compounds that might have some promising therapy that they want to start testing in animals. Of those, through the animal testing, only 5 of the 5,000 make it to human testing. And then of those 5 clinical trials, only 1 typically gets all the way through the finish line of an FDA approval to then start patient therapy. With that, the time and the effort throughout this process to get all the information between the sponsor company to the health authority, there's a lot of back and forth around, what is the testing, what types of patients, how we're going to go ahead and structure our clinical trials. That's all being filed to the FDA to seek and grant, approval to go ahead and move forward throughout this process.
Yeah, and Wendy, just to add to that, you'll see here that there's the file, the IND, and the file, the NDA components. This timeline is actually not inclusive of the time it takes to do the eCTD publishing services on these applications. So you can plan to factor in anywhere from 6 to 9 months for an IND and 12 to 18 months for an NDA. So it's important to make sure that you're factoring in the actual publishing component to allow it to be filed to the FDA or the health authority.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, Adrian, to make sure we plan ahead. Typically when you're starting to explore testing in humans, which is the IND, you could see in the discovery and preclinical testing, you see the duration of 6.5 years. We typically see clients reach out to us within like the 4.5 to 5 year range that they're saying, I think there might be some promising that we got to start thinking about seeking approval from the FDA, for example, to get this approved. So probably 2 years, the last 2 years of the preclinical testing is when these companies start thinking about what we need to do to plan strategy from a pre-IND. And then we start getting the entire story, if you will, and the contributors to help put that together. And that's something as a good signal to start thinking about if you are looking for either do it internally or, find a provider to help you plan out that eCTD. And as for the NDA, as Adrian mentioned, it usually takes around on average 12 to 18 months to put the eCTD together for the NDA, the new drug application. And the question is, well, do I wait till after phase 3 completion to then file? And the answer is typically no, right? Usually the sponsor company, they'll see some promising data in phase 2, and they might start planning in the beginning of phase 3 to start thinking about, we might have an opportunity, depending on the phase 3 outcomes, that we should start planning out our NDA. And that typically happens within, the early or the midpoint of phase 3 to start building out that strategy and start planning out that new drug application. So by the time the phase 3 study is complete, we pretty much have all the data already set up in the eCTD, and we're just waiting for that final data to then submit that on behalf. And then it takes 1.5 years for the FDA to then determine if it is safe and effective, and then result into ultimately, hopefully, an approval of that product.
Wendy, I see a phase 4 all the way on the right. So this is not a one-time deal and then you're done, right? So there's ongoing life to this process?
Yeah, that's a good question, Gary. Once the product is on the market, and if it stays on the market, you need to make sure you have to maintain that product from a regulatory standpoint. So for the life of the product, it will always maintain an eCTD lifecycle maintenance. But then Adrian's going to go over what that means. And so we're going to go over what that all entails.
All right, very good. Anything else on this? If not, we'll move to the next section.
Okay.
All right, so one of the things that we've been talking about at eCTD, and we really haven't described what this item is. So maybe we can ask Wendy and Adrian to help us out here. Give us a little bit of definition and maybe a background. It looks like if you go around the world, I don't know, well over 24 health authorities require this drug marketing application to make use of the eCTD. So let's get, before we go too much further, let's talk about this eCTD standard and a little bit about where it came from.
Yeah, sure. So let's start with the very basics. And eCTD stands for Electronic Common Technical Document. And this really stems from the initial iteration of Common Technical Document, which is non-inclusive of things like XML backbones and whatnot. This is a standard format that was implemented by ICH to essentially streamline the submission of regulatory data to the health authorities. And by developing a common format, it allows for ease of review for the reviewers, and it also allows sponsors to repurpose data in an electronic format, so that it allows them to basically streamline their timelines and cost savings when you're able to reuse. So as I mentioned previously, eCTD was developed by ICH, the International Council for Harmonization. So Wendy, can you explain a little bit more about how the ICH came into play?
Yeah, so I'm going to date myself because I used to be part of regulatory prior to eCTD.
Yeah.
But before the eCTD, people used to accept drug applications, or health authorities accepted drug applications in paper format. And there was no standardization on all the regulatory requirements on how you would submit your regulatory filing. So prior to eCTD, if you think about it, there's over 150 countries and multiple health authorities out there, and every single country had their own set of regulatory requirements on how to submit your drug application for approval. The ICH and all these other major countries, like there has to be a better way to streamline this. And before eCTD, just think about this. If you filed your drug application to the U.S., right, and you followed all the regulatory requirements of the U.S., then once that's submitted and reviewed, then you got to take another 12 months to take all that data, make it meet another health authority's requirements. And it was just such an inefficient way. And it also delayed some of these patient therapies, all because of the inefficiency. So the ICH got together and they all agreed that majority of the data is common technical document. It's common across all regions, which is the recipe of the drug, which is the CMC information, the preclinical testing, which are the animal studies, and the clinical studies. How can we all agree from an 80-20 perspective what is common across all regions, and how can we just build once and reuse many? Hence why we are, the adoption of eCTD was born.
Very good. Let's take a look at some of the purposes. I think you might have touched on some of these, but there's some purposes and some advantages that might be good to cover at this point.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. So if you could just advance it once more for the advantages, that would be great. So the eCTD serves several purposes, a lot of which we've just discussed, but it really comes down to, again, streamlining. And this comes from both, time to market, cost savings, things like that. So it really does reduce the number of resources and time on the industry side, and it does expedite the approval timeline. And then from a regulatory authority perspective, it does facilitate the review and improves the communication. All of these things together, again, efficiency, speed, cost savings, all the things that, all parties want. So those are some of the reasons to use eCTD and how it came about, and the advantages to doing that.
Yeah, and just to add in here is that in theory, with the common technical document, if the sponsor company has the ability to do it, in essence, you could submit simultaneous applications all at once and get multiple countries for approvals. So this is really such an enhancement to allow yourself to really, get that drug application to multiple regions at one time as well. So there's that possibility with the eCTD.
All right, well, I see this little triangle, and that appears everywhere. Whenever you start to see any information about eCTD, you see a triangle. Wendy and Adrian, help me out here. Let's figure out what's inside that triangle.
Yeah, so this is a pretty popular triangle if you've done any research into eCTD at all. And this really shows in a picture the different sections, or modules as we call it, in the eCTD. So it's broken down into 5, and as you see here, it's color-coded based on modules 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So starting at the top, there you have your administrative information, your cover letters, your forms, things like that. This is considered your regional information, and it's exactly as it sounds. It's the information that's very specific to the region in which you're submitting, and this is a module that cannot be replicated or cloned in its entirety, at least, because it's very specific. So then moving down into Module 2, these are where your summaries reside. And summaries, again, are exactly as they sound. They're going to be the summaries of the rest of the eCTD. So modules 3 through 5 are essentially summarized in Module 2 at a higher level. So for example, in 2.5 you have your clinical overview, and then you have your clinical summaries in 2.7. This is, as you can see here in the, oops, sorry, did I make that bigger? It summarizes Module 5, which is listed below it. And again, 2.4.2.6 summarizes the non-clinical studies in Module 4. So moving on to Module 3, we have the quality, or CMC, which is chemistry, manufacturing, and controls. Then in Module 4, you have your non-clinical or animal studies. And in Module 5 is where your clinical and human studies would reside. So this is a very high level picture of the sections. However, each one of these contains numerous subfolders and subsections, all of which data can be included at, and they are organized in the format of an electronic table of contents, if you will. This is your XML backbone. So it's like, as I mentioned, it's really just an electronic table of contents that allows reviewers to easily navigate to these particular sections, because some of them can become very granular depending on which section you're in.
Yeah, and I would like to add here, and these are some of the questions that I usually get around the common technical documents. Are there unique differences if you're submitting a biologic, or you're submitting a cancer drug, or a cardiology drug, or a small molecule product? The way the eCTD is structured, there is an entire hierarchy of documents that are standardized in all of the sections that Adrian has illustrated in the eCTD. There's a spot for every single document. So they thought about the forethought of the eCTD really is common across, and there's always a placeholder for every single relevant document. You're going to be able to find a section that's relevant of what you're doing, particularly based on the therapeutic area or the product that you are submitting. So common across all drug types as well.
All right, that's a really good summary of that complex triangle. Let's talk a little bit about another view of that triangle. There's various technical elements. Maybe you could talk about the different types of structure that exist inside here and what it actually contains.
Yeah, absolutely. So all of the sections that we previously mentioned and how granular they can get, all of those content files are essentially organized in several ways, and they have navigation that provides reviewers with ease of reviewing in several ways. So the first is a folder directory structure, and that's exactly what you're accustomed to from a file share perspective. It's a set of folders with subfolders and files that lie within. This is something that's very common in CTD form. Again, it's how you organize your file shares locally, and so as organized in folders and subfolders, the reviewer can navigate to the location that they're looking for based on those titles of those folders and navigate using more of a tree structure. And this is organized in viewing tools in this fashion if you're not using the XML to navigate. So that brings me to the XML, which again is like a electronic table of contents, and once opened it gives links for every single document that resides within the application, allowing the reviewer to simply click on that link and it will take you directly to the file. So once you're in the file, they themselves have, through the publishing process, have both internal and external navigation, again, lending to ease of review. So via bookmarks, hyperlinks, things of that nature, within the content files, you're able to easily move throughout the application, even from module 5, to different components of a study report, and then from obviously your summaries that will, link out to all the other different modules as well, so that it really facilitates review, and rather than paging through thousands of pages of data, they're able to just click links to get where they need to go.
Yeah, and I'll just like to add in there, to build out the XML, there's really, you need to have a validated electronic publishing system to produce this eCTD, and, and ensure that it follows the technical conformance guide. Throughout the process, the eCTD guidance came out in 2002. There's been iterative updates to the technical requirements, and just ensuring that your publishing technology and your team are well versed with all the changing regulatory guidelines, that is being incorporated to ensure that your XML is up to date based on the current standards that are being released by the ICH or your specific health authority.
So I did have one quick question. Not all the files are PDF files. There's a lot of data files like SAS data sets, and there's actually one file in there, an SPL, that ReadTech people are very familiar with. And then there's multiple submissions. So could you talk just a second about how the XML might be able to manage some of the submissions that handle changes and replacements and new content that is submitted?
Yeah, I think that we're going to go deep into that in the lifecycle maintenance aspect, but in a nutshell, there is a set sequences of how you keep up to date all the necessary documentation and how that's being planned out, and where they fall within the folder file structure, as well as the XML guidelines of what documents need to be at what version, how it needs to be presented, and how it needs to be finalized, so you do not get rejected from the FDA that your eCTD is not following the technical conformance guides as well. Because that could be the worst thing that happens, is a refusal of the file that you spent 15 years of all this beautiful data and content, and you are not able, and you get rejected because you're not following the technical conformance guides, and they can't open up the files to be able to review it, and that adds more timelines and issues and risks to your drug application to be reviewed effectively. But Gary, I'm going to hold off on that question on lifecycle, because we're going to go deep into that in the next subsequent questions.
Yeah, no, that's a good quick summary, and we'll pick up some details later. The next up is a little bit more of a discussion about eCTD process and some of the benefits. So there's huge amount of pages and files involved, not uncommon to be well over 100,000 pages. How does one go about organizing these? And if we can just do a quick review of these steps. It looks like there's a lot of details, but maybe we can get a quick overview.
Yeah, and Gary, if you can help me just advance it so we could see the entire workflow, and I think that would be a good headway of just explaining it all. And to build upon what we were saying earlier, and I like to use examples, with different types of drug applications. Some are very simple to very complex, and I'm just going to talk about, a typical oncology product. As you can understand from an oncology product, there could be an upwards of 15 to 2,000 standalone documents that are going to be submitted to that drug application. And how do we go about and managing all of that, into a cohesive, compliant eCTD? Every single one of those 1,500 documents will go through the first phase, which is, ensuring that all of the contributing authors are following a standardized CTD format when, building out their documents. And there's a very set regulations on how you author your documents if you're contributing to the eCTD. Once that's in, that will have all the necessary fonts, tables, formatting, subheaders, internal linking is all being done based on ICH standards. Once that's all completed, it then goes and moves over to PDF conversion. There's also a set technical guidelines that need to have a compliant PDF. And within that, that makes sure that you're following all the final activities that makes the file camera ready, or I call it ICH ready or camera ready, to then move to phase 2, which is the eCTD publishing. eCTD publishing then takes all those individual 1,500 files and then puts them in the right subheaders and sections within the overall electronic common technical document. And once they reside into their final resting place in the eCTD hierarchical structure, the publishers will then go ahead and start doing external linking, because there's a lot of cross-document linking that's happening from, this clinical summary document all the way through Module 5 to the necessary Phase 1, Phase 2, and Phase 3 studies. So that's all being, completed in a very iterative approach. Typically what we usually see when we're in and I'm just going to use an example of an NDA, all the non-clinical information is finalized. They could start publishing Module 4, get that all done, validate it, review it, shelve it, move on to, the CMC and the clinical section, get that all going through. And so by the time everything is all completed of the 1,500 files, we then move to publish the entire eCTD application and validate it from a technical conformance standpoint, just making sure the XML has the right appropriate metadata, everything is all set to the right versions of PDF, there's no broken bookmarks or hyperlinks, so on and so forth, and have the correct metadata information in there and MD5 checksums. Once that's all done, we then do another level of QC, and this is just ensuring we go through one last time that all the files are in their right location based on what the eCTD submission planner had agreed upon, and then also ensure that all the external linkings, it's great that links aren't broken, but we just have to ensure that, a clinical summary going to module 5321, table 1, when you click on the link, it's taking you to that section. So that's going through that level of QC to ensure there's a cohesiveness and that the reviewer is not going to have any confusion how they're going to navigate through your eCTD application. Once that's all finalized and everything is all accounted for, everything looks perfect, we then get the green light to now submit it to the health authority. And I'm just going to use the example for the FDA. They have an electronic submissions gateway. You might hear that acronym ESG. We are able to provide that setup of that ESG portal, or some clients also do it within themselves. There's an option to do it, but really plan ahead to get that ESG set up. And then we will go ahead and if a client asks us to submit it on their behalf, we will then upload the entire eCTD application to the health authority. They will then download it. You'll get a receipt from the FDA acknowledging a timestamp. Yes, we received it at this time, and here's your submission date. So now you have an acknowledgement that it's been received by the FDA. Then they will go ahead and download it into their document control room, and then they go through a review of the eCTD to make sure it follows the technical conformance before it then moves to the FDA review standpoint. So there's like a multiple step process. But that's in a nutshell of the entire eCTD submission workflow.
A lot of steps, Wendy, working your way through there. Now let's move on. I'm looking at the time. Why don't we pick up that maintenance question that I had a little bit earlier. I know there's a lot of items on the screen, but maybe just a quick summary of where we are with how you go about doing lifecycle maintenance.
Yeah, so like I said earlier, is that once the drug application is now submitted to the health authority. Once it's in eCTD, it's always in eCTD. And the way the mechanism of the common technical document, it's the single source of truth of how you're going to communicate with the health authority of every single thing that's happening with your drug application. As you can imagine, once you submit it, you're waiting for the FDA to review the application. You know naturally they're going to have additional questions, additional information, and all those correspondence back and forth with the FDA or any health authority needs to be submitted to the eCTD for record, right? Every single correspondent needs to go in there. Also, you know, the question is, well, how long does the eCTD last? In a nutshell, as long as the product is active in the marketplace, the eCTD is active. And I'll just give you an example. The oldest drug that I've worked with in my past life, and I'm dating myself, is Premarin. That drug was approved in 1942. That eCTD is active, right? Because there's ongoing study, you know, updates, safety requirements, annual maintenance of the product. Maybe there was a change in manufacturing facilities. Every single thing that you modify in how you're producing the product, how you're monitoring safety, changing the formulations, all of that has to be submitted to the eCTD. And that's the eCTD lifecycle maintenance activity to ensure that we have a single source of truth or a historical timeline of everything that's been submitted and approved or denied from the health authority through that eCTD.
All right, a lot of ongoing effort for sure, back and forth and updates and so on. Let's take a look at some of the challenges and the benefits. So from your experience, Wendy and Adrian, what would you identify as the benefits and some of the challenges? And if there are those challenges that you identify, how have you overcome them? So I think there's a lot of challenges here. Wendy, do you want to start us off here?
Actually, I think I'll jump in on this one.
Okay,
So,
great.
Yeah. So there definitely are quite a few challenges listed here. However, for the sake of time and also just kind of the top three, I'm going to go through based on my experience having worked both in pharma and at a large CRO with multiple clients. Some of the main things that we run into are regarding timelines, so that there's short publishing timelines or we're not meeting timelines. Oftentimes there's quality control issues, both from, you know, content perspective or a technical perspective, as well as, you know, missing documents or incorrect document version numbers. And the reason why I list all these three things, as well as some of the other ones on here, is really it comes back to kind of one main thing that you can do to alleviate some of these, and that is have a strong project management setup. Whether it's internally to your company or through the use of a vendor, whatever the case may be, really laying that groundwork early on and having strong project management throughout really can alleviate most of the problems that you see on your screen here. So for example, you know, with publishing timelines, laying that groundwork up front through the, you know, through project plan or various tools to track your timelines, and making sure that your project manager stays on top of the individual teams, you know, through reminders or banners, whatever the case may be, to make sure that we're meeting the upfront timelines, so that your, you know, your reg ops group or your vendor or whatever the case may be has the adequate time as well. And if they have the adequate time, you know, you're not foregoing review cycles. You're allowing the time at the end for quality control to really go through with a fine-tooth comb to make sure, you know, that things are the way that they're supposed to be. In regards to the documents, you know, all being accounted for and the correct versions, you know, again, project management from the standpoint of content planners, really allow, you know, tracking of those documents from the beginning to the end. So I can't stress enough that just through lessons learned and things with clients that, you know, kind of I think the saying is measure twice, cut once. That really goes for, you know, eCTD, where, you know, doing the work up front and just maintaining it throughout really will alleviate much of what you see here.
Yeah, and I like to add, you know, with what Adrian had mentioned, because I'm having some lessons learned and things that, I could think about that improved the quality of the eCTD. As you can imagine, using that 1,500 document example, right? Really finding a really clear contact model of like, who's your CMC gatekeeper, who's your clinical gatekeeper, who's your non-clinical gatekeeper, right? Ensuring that all the documents that are being handed off that are final, that are going to make it into the eCTD, there is that level of scrutiny saying, there's only one person assigned that's going to hand it over. So then we all know that we're not sending the wrong version, because the publishing aspect of it, you can imagine all the external linking. If we get the wrong version and we find out late in the game, we got to redo that step over again. So we kind of try to avoid that through ensuring that everyone understands who's going to be the gatekeeper to do the handover process to the eCTD provider for publishing.
All right, really good comments there, and reflecting on your experience, some really good takeaways. I'm going to pivot a little bit and then move the conversation over to the future of eCTD, the upcoming version change. There's a lot of talk about version 4.0. Can you give us some details about what that version is going to bring? Is there anything that manufacturers and sponsors need to change, and maybe some information on the timeline?
Yeah, no, that you're probably hearing, if you are experienced or even just new to, eCTD, there's been a lot of buzz around eCTD 4.0. So going from 3.2.2, which is what's the current approved guidelines right now that, majority of health authorities are accepting, to move to 4.0, there's a huge shift and change and a major change to the electronic common technical document. And I'll go over the timeline in the next slide. There are a lot of changes from 3.2.2 to 4.0, but I'm going to highlight 4 of the majors that I think are really different of what we're used to in submitting in the current eCTD guidelines. So for document reuse, in 4.0, this is very new in 4.0, is that every single document, use the example of the 1,500 files, they're each going to be assigned a unique document ID. And the reason why they adopted the unique document ID in 4.0 is that you only have to submit that document once. And you can refer that if you have another drug application, like I have my original drug application for this indication and I want to do another NDA that's going to reference a document that was in another NDA. I don't have to resubmit that document. All I have to do is just submit the document ID. And you're probably going to ask, what's in that document ID that they're able to, go through it? Are you sure? Is this going to delay it because they can't find the document? That document ID is going to have the full document title and also the relevant path of where the original source document was originally submitted. So when they click on it, it will go back. Rather than submit it 1,800 times, they just go back to the relevant path. So that's going to be a huge efficiency gain and streamlining on how documents are going to be submitted to the health authority. Second thing is around document metadata lifecycle. As we talked about lifecycle maintenance, they've improved it, right? And prior to 4.0, when you had a document submitted originally in the original drug application through the lifecycle, you're like, okay, I want to replace this document. So you had to do all these operational changes to withdraw that document and replace it, delete it, no longer relevant. What they've enhanced here is you can go ahead and do replace one document to one easily. You started with one document and now you have multiple granularity because it kind of makes sense to have it in a granular fashion. You can replace that one document to many documents, or you could take many documents and consolidate it into one. That was not an ability in the former, and that's now going to be an enhancement in 4.0. As far as management and context groups, this is basically a group of relevant documents based on their nature of use. And so what I mean by that, you could take a bunch of documents that are relevant to each other and then group them as a set. And how you're able to do that with 4.0, they are now issuing a controlled vocabulary of data, so keywords, if you will, to subset and group these documents together. So now it enables the reviewer to review a set of documents that are relevant based on the keywords. So that's pretty phenomenal as well. And you can also rename your documents and context groups through the XML in a very seamless fashion as well. And it was very convoluted in 3.2.2. The other major change is the XML file. Now, when you're submitting 4.0, it's only one overall harmonized XML backbone. Prior to 4.0, you're going to see multiple XMLs, right? So you're going to have the STF XML, you're going to have the regional XML, and then the overall index XML. All of that's going to be consolidated and be adopted into one overall XML backbone. So those are the major changes that are happening in 4.0. Okay, next slide, please, Gary.
This is the timing slide?
Yeah, so the timing slide here is, all the different major regions of when eCTD 4.0 will be mandatory. And you can see here, some countries are piloting right now. Some countries are saying we are ready to take on 4.0. So if you want to submit 4.0, we're accepting them now, right? And then if you look at the final column, you'll say this is mandatory. We are no longer accepting 3.2.2. We have to go, and any eCTDs moving forward need to be in 4.0 format. Okay.
All right, we'll move to the next one.
Yeah, and if you can hit advanced too as well, sorry. One more. Yeah, and I'm just going to summarize because the nature of time, I know we have another section. You can see here in summary, what the benefits are with the eCTD. Currently, you'll look at the map. The highlighted colors of the map is the major regions that are accepting eCTD. There's over 28 health authorities that are accepting eCTD. The other countries, they are submitting CTD folder file structure format, so they are CTD, but they don't have the XML backbone because of their technology limitations and not ready. But in all of those forms, everyone is following one standard hierarchical format and submitting their regulatory applications. So that's pretty much it.
Very good. Great review of the eCTD. I'm going to, again, switch over to and focus in on ReadTech and some of the services that we offer here. And if you've been following the news on our website, you have seen a press release as of July 18 of this year, 2023, that now ReadTech is offering eCTD services. So this is a very significant event. I'm so excited about this particular offering that we now offer to our clients and other people that are interested in preparing eCTD. So Wendy and Adrian, great additions to the staff here around ReadTech and leading this particular service. Can you give us a little bit more details than we're open for business?
Yeah, basically we are open to help clients out with their eCTD application. We do have experience to submit eCTD and globally, all the major regions that are accepting it. We have a fully validated eCTD publishing technology platform to be able to produce it, as well as experts. Adrian and I have been in the regulatory operations experience for over 20 years. So we have been living and breathing eCTDs on behalf of our clients and helping them get their drugs reviewed and ultimately approved. The types of applications that we have experience in working with is small molecule, biologics, generics, and combination. And these are just some of the acronyms in the alphabet soup of all the different filing types that we're able to support as well. And just to talk about the engagement, there's all these little different facets of the eCTD. ReadTech can help with a portion, end-to-end, or just support you in any way as far as advisory support, helping you because you're limited in staff, that you need extra resources to be able to support you with your eCTD submission, review your submission. These are all different aspects or components that we can help you around your application as well.
All right, this looks really exciting, Wendy. Are you able to maybe dive into some of the functions and services? There's a lot of, different types of support surrounding eCTD, and it looks like the chart is pretty well checked off here.
Yeah, so here's all the different things, as I mentioned earlier. Sometimes I've seen some examples where clients are working on a major application, and one of their resources, they're limited in their resources. We can help fill you in to be able to support, the document preparation activity to get those documents, standalone documents, CTD ready. We can help the entire eCTD, building and construct. We can provide project management expertise to manage it. We can give you advisory support as like, what do you think? Should we submit to US, then EU? How will we go about and planning out that from an eCTD perspective? We can provide you that guidance as well. Also, we can manage all your end-to-end lifecycle maintenance. And then I don't know if everyone has been keeping up to date with the technical conformance guidelines, but if you saw that the FDA released a guideline in November of 2022 in Module 3 that any chemical molecular structure will now be highly recommended to be submitted in structured data file format. We have a solution that we are almost there, and there's more, stay tuned on that, but we're going to be able to provide that ability to convert these chemical molecular structures to structured data file format as well. So stay tuned for that, more information to follow.
Wendy, thanks for that great summary. This is exciting. Really anxious to see how this launches and helps our clients. It looks like, checking the time here, we do have a portion here set aside for question and answers. There's been some questions that have come in. I think, Aaron, what we ought to do at this point in view of the time, reserve those and have individual responses come back. And if you would want to close us out here with, just the contact information, Aaron, thank you very much.
If you have any questions about eCTD in general, about today's presentation, or about ReadTech's new eCTD services, you can reach us at pharma@readtech.com or the number that you see displayed on your screen, and we will have someone get back to you as soon as possible. Thanks again for joining us today, and we look forward to our next educational webinar on eCTD.